Hey guys, so my name is Michaela Morgan, and today I will be reviewing and informing you guys on Module 7, Post-War Jazz and Broadway, Chapter 29. And a little bit about myself is I am class of 2028. I am a freshman, so that means I'm a freshman, and I'm majoring in pre-nursing. So, yeah, let's get into it. So in this chapter, we will be discussing a little bit about jazz and its history and Broadway, a little background information about Broadway. So during the first half of the 20th century, when the U.S. was experiencing significant social and economic change, so was jazz music. From the struggles of the Great Depression to the following World War II, the consumers of jazz music had evolved their ears to another kind of music known as rock and roll, while jazz evolved to a sound what is known as bebop. With the idea that musicians couldn't express themselves the way they wanted in mind, young performers cultivated a new style known as bebop, with the intent for performers to lead instead of the composers or arrangers. Bebop is a style of jazz that emerged in the 1940s. It is characterized by its fast tempos, complex harmonies, and more entertaining nature. Bebop was played by small combos, typically consisting of a trumpet, saxophone, piano, double bass, and drums. Some of the most famous bebop musicians include Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. The creations of this new virtuosic style of jazz took place in selected small nightclubs in Midtown Manhattan and Harlem. So in the last chapter, we introduced Charlie Bird Parker. Charlie went by two nicknames, Yardbird or Bird, but he was a very talented jazz musician who was born into poverty in Kansas City, Missouri. He rose to the top of his profession through his hard work and talent. But Parker was a drug addict and alcoholic, and his personal life was a mess. Parker moved through life very carefree and made music for himself rather than for his fans. He died at the young age of 30, but Parker had a very innovative style of playing irrevocably, and he changed the history of jazz. In 1950, Charlie Parker collaborated with another bebop legend, Dizzy Gillespie, to put their spin on the classic love song "My Melancholy Baby," which was originally written in 1912 and had become a well-known standard. A standard is a song that is so influential that many musicians want to create their own interpretations, known as covers. By making and recording many of these standards, Parker and Gillespie helped establish bebop as a respected style of jazz. They aimed to be very creative and original, and by using a standard, they gave listeners a familiar foundation to appreciate their unique interpretations. The breakdown. My Melancholy Baby is a good example of early 20th century standards, featuring a simple structure, a 16-bar melody split into four phases, A, B, A, C. The performance begins with a 4-bar introduction by pianist Thelonious Monk, after which Parker plays the melody straightforwardly with some moderate embellishments. When Giuseppe returns in for the second part, he adds more intricate notes and faster rhythms. This complexity continues into the third section, which Parker and Monk share. The result is music is more focused on listening rather than dancing. Bebop is often referred to as the chamber music of its designed to appeal to us because of its designed to appeal a select audience and create a knowledgeable fan base. By 1959, jazz had grown into more than one specific style: jazz, swing, or bebop. Bebop being the most popular but not loved by everyone, due to its fast tempo. As a result, cool jazz becomes popularized, which was a more softer take on bebop's hard sound. Cool jazz was created to have a more relaxed feel and less chaotic solos. An example of this would be Davis's album Birth of the Cool, 1949. In this tune, Davis sang with a more lyrical, low range, and softer dynamics. During the late 1950s, John Coltrane, who worked with Miles Davis, created another form of jazz music recognized as modal jazz. Modal jazz is a special kind of music that came from bebop, which is another jazz style. In most music, you hear like pop songs or classical music. There are certain there are certain patterns that the music follows, like moving through specific chords in a regular way. These patterns make the music sound familiar and comfortable, almost like a rule that everyone expects. However, instead of just sticking to the usual major scales, model jazz uses other types of scales called modes and focuses on chords that aren't just the usual ones we hear all the time. While it's kept the main chord is called the tonic, it explores other chords as well. In bebop, musicians change chords rapidly, but in modern jazz, the changes are slower, which gives musicians more time to play around with the melody. This means that they can be more creative and stretch out their music instead of rushing them from one to another. So, in model jazz, musicians have more freedom to explore and create new sounds without being tied to the usual patterns we expect in most music. Okay, so here we're going to talk about John Coltrane, and he lived from 1926 to 1967. John Coltrane is known as the greatest of the greats in jazz. Like Parker, he was a victim to drug addiction that eventually cost him his life. Coltrane was well known for his musical originality when creating new pieces from standard. An example of this would be his album My Favorite Things in 1960, where he created the entire album from widely known covers of Broadway greats, including Richard Rodgers, George Gershwin, and Cole Porter. John Coltrane took the cheerful Broadway song from Richard Rodgers' musical The Sound of Music in 1959, the hit My Favorite Things sung by Julie Andrews, and transformed it into something that was much more complex and darker. Coltrane studied and became influenced by Indian music, which showed in his creation. He created a long improvisation on his soprano saxophone, playing a recognizable version of the tune, but with richer, more complicated chords. He layered intricate notes over a simple two-chord harmony, and I'm going to play a snippet of it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about jazz fusion. During the 1960s, jazz music went from being recognized as closer to mainstream music. Into the 1970s, jazz music decreased in sales while rock music increased. As a result, jazz musicians like Miles Davis added electric bass and strong drumming to create jazz fusion, a blend of rock and jazz. The importance of this proves that any music without a catchy tune or beat won't be popular for long. Although soon after, smooth jazz made a swift comeback. Jazz music continuously changes between cool and hot, heavy beat and weak beat, bebop or non-bebop. Okay, so now we're going to get into my favorite part, the Broadway musicals. Broadway is not just a musical style like majority of people think, but is a real neighborhood of theaters in New York. It spans from 28th Street and runs nearly 40 theaters up along the west side until 54th Street. Some theaters often have dramatic plays and comedies, but nearly all the theaters regularly host Broadway musicals. The Broadway musical is a form of American popular music theater created around the 1900s. The musical is almost always based on a book that contains lyrics. Most of the dialogue in musicals are spoken, but the emotional high points are always sung. Early Broadway musicals like George M. Cohan's Little Johnny Jones and Jerome Kern's Showboat were significant with introducing American styles American music styles like blues and jazz. A key partnership in musical theater was between the composers Richard Rodgers and lyricist Oscar Hammerstein, who created many famous shows in the 1940s and 1950s, starting with in starting with Oklahoma in 1943, followed by hits like Carousel, South Pacific, The King and I, and The Sound of Music. Their musicals were popular, running for over 2,200 performances. They were well known for their catchy songs, many of which are still loved today, like "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning" and "You'll Never Walk Alone." The birth, the British invasion in music is often associated with the Beatles arriving in America in 1963. However, a second wave came a few years later with British composer Andrew Lloyd Webber, who brought big hits to Broadway like Jesus Christ Superstar, Evita, Cats, and The Phantom of the Opera. His shows were known for their beautiful melodies, rich orchestration, and impressive stage productions. Today, Broadway is all about diversity. While The Phantom of the Opera still runs, there are also revivals of classical American musicals like The King and I, new traditional shows like Chicago and Wicked, which is my favorite, adaptations of popular movies such as Disney's Aladdin and in The Lion King, musicals based on pop music like Jersey Boys and Mamma Mia, and even though with religious things like the Book of Mormon and Amazing Grace. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Leonardo Bernstein and West Side Story, 1957. Leonardo Bernstein was a highly influential composer and conductor in the 20th century. He studied at Harvard and the Curtis Institute and was well known for creating symphonies, ballets, films, scores, and musicals, including the famous West Side Story. Bernstein conducted the New York Philharmonic for nearly 50 years and was a talented pianist and educator who even influenced U.S. President John F. Kennedy. West Side Story, which premiered on Broadway in 1957, became a huge hit by blending traditional Broadway music with modern styles. It retells the classic story of Romeo and Juliet in a contemporary setting, replacing the feuding families with rival street gangs, the Jets and the Sharks in New York City. The main characters, Tony and Maria, meet at high school dance and share a romantic moment on her fire escape, singing the duet "Tonight," which captures the beauty and intensity of their love. The song features fluctuating tempos and rhythms reflecting the emotions of the young couple with influences from Latin music to rhythms reflecting the emotions of the young couple with influences from Latin music to represent Maria's background. Despite their deep love, Tony and Maria's story is tragic as Tony faces a tragic fate shortly after their romance begins, leaving his love Maria to grieve alone. And I'm going to play a little snippet of their duet. I speak my words, and in every nothing else but you. And there's nothing for me but Maria. Every sight that I see is not funny. Stephen Sondheim and Sweeney Todd. Stephen Sondheim wrote the lyrics for Leonard Bernstein's West Side Story. He later became a famous composer for many Broadway show sounds, which he learned from Broadway greats like Oscar Hammerstein and modernist composer Milton Babbitt, which helped him blend clever lyrics with complex music. Sondheim is known for improving American music theater in the late 20th century by mixing modern musical styles with sharp poetic lyrics. His musicals include a variety of sounds from jazz to dissonant music and waltzes and traditional Broadway songs. He is notable for his works like A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Forum and Into the Woods. However, his most famous musical, Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street, is considered a masterpiece. It's based on a dark 19th century story about a barber who kills his clients and turns them into meat pies. Sweeney Todd is unique for being almost entirely sung with little spoken dialogue. It features complex music that challenges singers and includes elaborate singing. The show weaves together various plots about the characters in Todd's life, but the standout feature in it is its brilliant music, which was even led to opera companies performing it into a successful film adaptation in 2007, directed by Tim Burton, starring Johnny Depp. Andrew Lloyd Webber and Phantom of the Opera. Andrew Lloyd Webber is one of the most successful composers in musical theater history. Known for his profitable and popular shows, his famous musicals include Jesus Christ Superstar, Evita, Cats, Starlight Express, and began The Phantom of the Opera. Like other great composers, he received classical training at Oxford University and the Royal Academy of Music of London. However, unlike American composers who often use modern styles, Lloyd Webber's work has a romantic side, featuring beautiful, memorable melodies and rich orchestration with strong brass and strings. His collaboration with director Tim Rice has had led to spectacular productions that attracted audiences. The Phantom of the Opera, which debuted in London in 1986, and in New York in 1988, is the longest run round Broadway musical with over 11,000 performances and 15.5 million attendees in New York alone. Its popular songs like "The Music of the Night" and "All I Ask of You" continue to resonate with audience. The musical has been performed in 145 cities around the world. It has a gross of nearly $6 billion today. It is known globally all over the musical world. And finally, we are going to discuss the economics of Broadway and the listening experiences of today. The saying, "Want to do a show, bring some dough," highlights the importance of money in getting a Broadway production off of the ground. To stay a show, a theater needs to be rented, performers hired, and the venue must be equipped and advertised. The advertising budget for a Broadway musical can range from $15,000 to $100,000 each week. The average cost to produce a show is around $7 million, but more complex productions like Spider-Man: Turn Off the Dark can cost up to $75 million. To cover these expenses, producers gather a group of investors and sell shares in the musical. If the show is successful, investors share the profit. If it fails, they lose their money. Reviews are very important for a show's success, but even if it receives good reviews, there are still significant weekly costs to maintain the production. Around $350,000 for a mid-sized show like Mamma Mia, and nearly $600,000 for a big production like The Phantom of the Opera. Successful shows can earn back their costs quickly. For example, Phantom can make $1.5 million in a good week, while The Lion King can earn about $2 million. However, high ticket prices averaging $98 for Phantom and as much as $477 for The Book of Mormon don't guarantee profits, as only about 30% of musicals make money. To generate more revenue, and improve the chances of a show's success, producers can follow the example of airlines by adding more seats in the same space. Recently, some Broadway theaters have started moving musicians out of the traditional pit, the area between the stage and the audience, and replacing them with extra seats. The musicians still play live, as required by union rules, but they are now located in separate rooms 2 or 3 floors above the theater, and their music is delivered to the audience through speakers. Instead of seeing the conductor in the pit, the performers on the stage watch the conductor on the TV monitor. This new setup helps increase ticket sales, but leaves audiences more unsure if the music is live or a recorded show. Okay, so this is all of the keywords and vocabulary all from the entire chapter that was highlighted all throughout the PowerPoint. But all of my information came from my textbook, my class textbook on Cengage as well. But this is the end of the PowerPoint on post-war jazz. And I hope you guys enjoyed. I know it's very lengthy, but this is my first time doing this. I just hope I was able to, entertain and inform you guys on my chapter. Good night. Bye.